Hi doll faces, today I'm going to put my hat into the ring with regard to the big discussion that's been going on about feminine and masculine in spirituality, which has been really interesting, by the way. I've watched quite a few of the videos, I must admit to having not seen them all, but it's been a really interesting thing to watch from people, their various different ideas on this subject. And it was a topic that I was planning on doing a video about a while ago, because I started reading Body of Wisdom by Hilary Hart, and I was interested in a lot of what she had to say about femininity and about the female body, and I wanted to kind of discuss that. I may discuss that during the course of this video, but I'm not sure if maybe I'll just do it as part of my book review. But either way, it was very interesting, and there was a lot in there that I appreciated but didn't necessarily agree with, and it really got me to thinking about my own relationship with the idea of the divine feminine and the idea of masculine and feminine in that duality of Godhead. And with regard to my own practice, it's not been something that's been a massively huge part of my practice, aside from over the last year, I suppose. I made a video a while ago about having found my patron deity, and that was kind of interesting for me because it wasn't something that I was really looking for necessarily, but that happened, and that kind of opened me up more to ideas on this duality notion that's come into play as a result of Wicca becoming so popularised, and Wicca really embracing that male and female, masculine and feminine duality. I agree with Anya's video, in which she said that a lot of this stuff actually comes from Jung, and a lot of people maybe don't realise how instrumental his ideas have been in this notion of feminine and masculine duality in spiritual learning. And I would agree with that very much. And the way in which I use feminine and masculine on my spiritual journey are really with regard to the notion of the Anima and the Animus. So I think that's probably where I should begin. In Jungian theory, there's this idea that inside every man there's a woman, and inside every woman there's a man, because we have both male and female genes. And he really embraced this theory that whatever is celebrated in society as being typically masculine, whatever is celebrated in society as being obviously or typically or overtly male, those are the qualities and the attributes that a female is typically likely to find it more difficult to get in touch with, because they are not so celebrated when you're a female, they're not so encouraged, they're not so instructed by society. And vice versa, men may typically find it more difficult to get in touch with whatever qualities and attributes and strengths have been feminised, or have been kind of associated by wider society with what it means to be female. So a lot of people think that this feminine and masculine idea is really about separating us, and it's really about defining and distinguishing the ways in which we're different. But I don't see it that way. I actually see it as an encouragement for men to embrace the feminine and for women to embrace the masculine, in terms of basically us being permitted to look past what society thinks we ought to be and how society thinks we ought to act, and you know how this kind of notion has gone on over time, and to really understand at heart level that the individuation process is about unification of all facets of the self. And that's why, I think a lot of women have difficulty with getting in touch with the divine masculine, and potentially vice versa. And that's why I think there is such a desire for duality in this day and age. It's not because we are looking at the masculine as other if we're female. When I look at my patron deity, I see the masculine within me. And what I think I really want to get across here is, from a Jungian perspective, from my Jungian perspective anyway, sex is biology and gender is psychology. And if one was to ask, well, who's to say that, certain traits of gender are, associated with a certain sex, that's not what's being said from my perspective at all. What's being said is that society and kind of history and all of those other influences have kind of denoted to us over time what is of the female and what is of the male. But the reality is that it is all psychology. The feminine and masculine really don't have anything to do with what's in your trousers. That's genuinely how I see it. And I think, if you were to ask anybody in the transgender community how they felt, they would say that, the only thing that defines you as a woman is if you identify as a woman. And I agree. Or vice versa. So really, what it is for me is it's got nothing really to do with sex necessarily. And I know that might seem strange for people to understand, but to me, when we look at unifying the gender polarity, we're looking at unifying those parts of our psychology. And we live in a society, and we live particularly now during a time where we're really starting to open up the debate about what exactly it means to be masculine or feminine, and whether or not that really has anything to do with sex, rather than having to do with gender, which I feel is fluid and I feel is about the mind. So, maybe in the past I've used the word gender as being synonymous with biology, but I really think it's better to say that sex is biology and gender is psychology. So the way I use my duality in my practice with the divine feminine and divine masculine is really in terms of individuation. It's in terms of the Jungian notion of unifying all facets of the self. And that's how I use it. So when I look at my God, I don't see something other to me. I see his powers within me. And when I look at my goddess, I see her powers within me. I don't see that it has anything to do with the fact that the God is other because he's male. I see it as that inside of me, I am my own father, I am my own brother, I am my own male partner. And I need to find all of those parts within me that reflect that. So Jung's idea of the anima and the animus was basically this notion that inside of you, if you are a female, you have all of the qualities and characteristics and strengths and attributes and core abilities, etc., that you would be trained to associate with being male. You have them inside of you. So when the animus, that's what females have inside of them, which represents their masculine qualities, if you like, societally speaking, when the animus is in a healthy relationship with the woman that's going through the therapy or working towards individuation, it means that they are recognising everything within themselves which they have been trained to think of as classically male. It's all within them, they have it all. And when the animus is toxic, is when the woman doesn't actually recognise those abilities in herself and instead will look outwards towards a male to fulfil that idea of what the perfect man is, what the perfect masculine energy is. And they will project. And this is when the animus or anima becomes toxic. The same is true of the man. The anima is the innate feminine quality, meaning whatever society has deemed to be feminine, whatever we as a society, as a species deem to be feminine, is within the male. So the anima is a representation of the way the male sees the feminine. And when the anima is doing its work, when the male is going through individuation, he's basically recognising that all of those feminine attributes are within him. He is unified, he is whole on his own. When the anima is being toxic, when the anima is being poisoned or unhealthy, basically the male is failing to recognise the feminine attributes within himself and instead attempting to project his perfect idea of what a female is onto a woman. And this can be very dangerous because it means that the woman is never given actually a chance to be herself. She is dealing with a male projection of what she ought to be. And she is kind of fostering that projection, and in that sense she then can't connect to her animus. She can't connect to the part where she is whole in herself and has all of those energetic frequencies and core abilities within herself, because she's busy living up to this projection of what the man wants her to be, because the man needs to project because he's not in touch with his own feminine. That was an extremely long-winded and complicated way of saying it. I'm trying to explain it as simply as possible. Jung believed that inside every man, when they get in touch with their anima comes along in 4 separate stages, and the man must go through and understand all 4 of those separate stages of embracing everything within him which has typically been feminized by society, in order to understand that he need not look elsewhere for that, and he need not project outwards for that. It is within him. He doesn't need to search for it. It's within him. And Jung believed that the anima had 4 distinct stages in order to bring it into consciousness and understand it in a healthy way. The same with the animus for women, 4 distinct stages. And I may explain them in another video, but they're going to take me slightly off topic in the context of this video. But Jung was very clear about it, and he really believed that, in a sense, what I think people misunderstand about Jung, and what I think people misunderstand about male and female, feminine and masculine, duality and spirituality, is I feel that people think it's about being divisive. People think it's about separation. People think it's about putting a straight line down the middle and saying this is what's feminine and this is what's masculine, and that's that. If you're female, you represent this. If you're male, you represent this. And the most important thing that I want to get across with this video is that I believe the complete opposite. I believe that the use of feminine and masculine duality in spirituality stems from the desire to integrate every part of us into one being, so that we are not trying to project or search for something which we feel is outside of our nature and trying to get that from some other source. Individuated women who are in touch with their animus and work confidently with their animus are the kind of women who, for example, will go through with a creative idea. They'll embrace their leadership skills. They will understand that even though they may feel that society is telling them that they've got to lean on a man and they've got to take the man's initiative, etc., they'll understand, because they're in touch with their animus and they're individuated in that sense. They will understand that that stuff comes from within and they need not search outside for it. And the same is true of men who are going through the individuation process. If they can come to accept that actually being emotional, being able to be sensitive, being able to be receptive to other people's feelings, empathy, that kind of thing, if they can come to accept that that is within them, they do not need to search outside of it for, you know, some kind of entity that's packaged in the female form in order to get that, or in order to take from it, in order to, you know, glean from it. If they can appreciate that it's within them, then they are well on their way to becoming individuated. So really, Jung's idea of anima and animus is about equality in a nutshell. It's not about dividing between female and male dependent upon how you were born. It's about recognizing that all of those attributes are within you, kind of like no matter what society says or no matter what society tries to kind of pump into you. So that's what I really wanted to say, is when I look at duality of feminine and masculine in spirituality, I'm thinking of anima and animus, and I'm thinking of the notion that I can embrace my divine masculine qualities in terms of what's already been set out for me through history, through time, through human perception, through the overwhelming consensus of human consciousness that yes, these qualities are masculine and these are feminine. The notion of working with both God and Goddess provides me with this inner knowledge that I can embrace everything within me, which is the case, and that there is nothing outside of me that I can't get, that I need to go elsewhere and find from some man or, you know, something that I can never be. I can be all of it in a sense. And my relationship with my patron deity has been incredibly important on this point, because it's made me realise from a personal perspective that when I talked about being in touch with my masculine energies in the past, I was actually quite mistaken about that. I've always been a very kind of gung-ho, forthright, very opinionated woman. I've never shied away from confrontation. I used to, when I was younger, have problems with rage, in fact. I'm very vocal when I'm angry about something. I'm very good at articulating. My throat chakra is quite intimately connected to my sense of indignation. And I always felt that this feeling I had, that I didn't want to shy away, that I was always up for kind of doing battle, that I was able to fight for my rights, that I was able to protect myself, that I didn't need anybody else. I always felt that this was the embodiment of my divine masculine, my embracing of my masculine energy, when actually I've realised that that was quite wrong. So far, my patron deity, who turned out to be Tyr, has taught me so much about the fact that, I mean, he's the god of oaths, he's the god of honour, he's the god of law, as well as being the god of war. He's the god of glory, but he's also the god of rules and oaths and honour and truth. And he's made me realise a lot about my own relationship to my divine masculine as I see it, and how actually a lot of it is about control, and a lot of it is about recognising when it's necessary to use force by word or by deed, when it's necessary to actually kind of go up onto your hind legs and get into battle stance, and when it's actually important to use grace and tact and diplomacy and debate, and when it's okay to walk away. And all this kind of thing has come into play since I've been working with my patron, and it's actually really involved some quite emotional times for me, because it's made me realise that actually I was fostering this overtly negative notion of what divine masculine could potentially mean, when in fact inside Tyr, because he's Godhead, he is the perfect embodiment of his divine feminine. He is individuated. So if this doesn't sound too complicated, When I look at Tia as my symbol of divine masculine, he in himself must be wholly individuated to embrace his divine feminine. So he's looking back at me as I'm looking back at him, fully individuated. So he is not just the divine masculine in essence. He is integration, he is unification, he is the whole. He, in turn, must accept his divine feminine traits in order to be an individuated being. Hell, the same way, she's my matron deity. Hell as an individuated being, is not just a reflection for me of the divine feminine. Not only that, she must be individuated by virtue of the fact that my consciousness has assigned her as, you know, something spiritually pure and spiritually meaningful. Therefore, she must be in touch with her divine masculine too, and she must be able to use it. She must be in touch with her animus, if you like to see it that way. And it's made me realise so much about my relationship to feminine and masculine energy in essence. And I've always said, you know, that if you don't enjoy the terms feminine and masculine, but you do actually relate to the notion of duality in some sense, you can use the terms yin and yang, because they mean just the same thing. And Anya was talking in her video about different ways that she sees duality, as creation and destruction, for example, which is one that I have definitely used in the past. And also as manifest or unmanifest, which is another great one. I have often used release and receive as being a duality that I can actually connect with and understand. That's kind of helped me to understand, you know, many of life's challenges that have come up and what I want to do in my spiritual journey. I've also used the notions of art and maths as being a duality, and I think that can be quite understandable in terms of what we're trying to talk about with feminine and masculine as gender, as psychology. Art and maths together create a whole. With only one half there and the other half absent, you're going to have some kind of imbalance. But of course, both energies are distinct, they're separate, and they are very, you know, they're very different, but they interplay perfectly. They form this perfect connection, which makes us feel this sense of wholeness and unification. Order and chaos is another one that I've used, and that Anya said that she's used to try and understand the interplay of different forces and energies at work. And it's been said many times over by many prominent thinkers in the psychological world, certainly, that duality is used as a way for human beings to break things down and understand them. It seems that just as we have two halves of the brain, we desire to look at things in two parts, and that can be very illuminating for us. So I think that's where a lot of people might stumble with the divine feminine and divine masculine, or the breakup of feminine and masculine energy, is that they see that something is going on there that they can click into, that notion of duality, and they understand that the different forces at work, you know, night and day, dark and light, and all that kind of thing, they understand how that relates to their human experience, but they're not quite sure on using the terms feminine and masculine, and that's fine. You can use yin and yang, you can use any of these other terms to think about the interplay of the relationships of two distinct forces in your life. Life and death would be another good one. I mean, what would one be without the other, right? And that goes into Anya's idea of manifest and unmanifest. So there are different ways of thinking about it. And the other thing that I would say about feminine and masculine with regard to Godhead, as I said, it's not always been a huge part of my practice. I never really felt that there was any huge overwhelming need to have a patron deity. I did go looking for a death goddess, and I did find myself claimed by hell. I mean, it was that strong, I would say. I could use the word claimed with great accuracy. But it was never something that I felt. Duality of Godhead with regard to feminine and masculine was not something that I actively sought. It's something that's come into being over time, and it's been more and more on the way as I've come into my relationship with Jung over time, with much more intimacy, and tried to understand really what he was saying about Anima and Animus, and how grossly misinterpreted I feel it's sometimes been. For a woman to get in touch with her inner masculine is not to say that she needs to reach out for something that she doesn't naturally have and adopt it to her. It was Jung's idea of saying you are individuated alone. You need not lean on any notion of masculinity. Whatever society reflects as being masculine is within you, and it is your job to go into the core and find it within you, and then you'll never lean again. You will have the spirit to create. You won't feel you need to take a man's lead. And the same is true the other way around, you know, that men can be sensitive, that they can be intuitive, that they can be receptive to what's going on, that they can use great compassion, that they can fight for peace, or peace for peace, as you might say. I feel that that's true too. I feel that Jung's whole point, and if you listen to him talk about it, you can understand what I mean, and he speaks about it much more than I'll ever be able to, articulately, sorry. But what he's really saying is that it is all within. Individuation is the process of finding all of those key attributes within you. And what I've really learned about archetypes, and the four main archetypes really that you need to get your head around with Jung would be anima, animus, self, and persona. Before you go into like trickster, mother, father, whatever else, those are the big four. And what I've really realised about archetypes in general is that the most basic and crude form of any archetype is the picture that we have of it. Jung said that the only way to truly experience an archetype really is emotionally. We take it down to the base level, the very foundation level, when we're just looking at an image of it and kind of assigning meaning to that image. And that's why so many pagans and witches who work with personified deity go within and journey with that deity. They find out what the deity represents beyond the picture. What does it represent beyond the image that society has foisted upon it over time? And Egyptian's done a great video about this, which I'll link below. In fact, I think she's done a couple about it, which I'll try and link below, where she talks about really going beyond the image, really finding what is it about your emotional connection with that deity. And from there it becomes so much more expansive. If I was linked to my matron deity purely in terms of, you know, what the poetic Edith said that she looked like, and, you know, said that her kingdom looked like, it would be a very droll and very surface connection. I have journeyed with her. I have astral projected myself to her realm. I have asked her to come to me in dreams. I have entered trance work with the expressed desire to get in touch with what her archetype represents to me emotionally, what it represents to me spiritually, what it represents at the very depths of who I am. I want to get beyond the picture. The picture is the surface of the water. I want to go within. And Jung said that the search for God is the search for self. So really all the time I know that I'm looking for me, and I can't just know me from my mirror reflection, right? I can't know me from what I look like. I must go deeper. I must go deep, deep, deep within, way beyond the surface image that I present to the world and what I look like in the mirror. And the same is absolutely true of Godhead. If I really believe that the search for God is the search for self, and that is what I do believe 100%, then I must go beyond what the archetype reflects to me on a physical basis. I must go beyond the images, you know, and I must go beyond gender as sex. I must go deeper. I must go into gender as psychology. And you know, I think that this is probably the most complex video I've ever done in terms of what I'm talking about, and I've made no notes aside from the things that Anya said that I wanted to mention. So if there are any questions about what I've discussed in this video, please, I promise you I will respond to all the questions, because I understand this is probably complex. But the main thing that I wanted to get out there was that when we're talking about gender, we're talking about it as psychology. From my perspective, from a Jungian perspective, we're not talking about division. That's not what we're trying to do. We're not seeking to separate. We're seeking to unify by representing the masculine as something which is innate within you. As much as society tells you you may need to go elsewhere for it, or you're not entitled to display it, or you're not entitled to embody it, Jung's message was that you are, and you must, if you want to become individuated. It is essential to the process of individuation. And that is why I use feminine and masculine deity in my practice to an extent, is because of that relationship I have with his notions of anima and animus, and the idea that integration, true unification of the self, can only come through recognising that nothing is outside of you, that you are the whole, and you know that it doesn't matter which body you were born into. You must connect with everything about you which society seeks to teach you is not the case, because it is the case, and you don't need to go outside to grasp it. You grasp it here. And my relationship with Tia has completely opened me up to that on a completely new level. This God has taught me things that I never believed at 29 I would still need to learn. I'm getting a bit emotional. Yeah, it's magic. It's magic. I'm so grateful to journey with him for this leg of my spiritual life. And what I realised, that the major recognition that I came to the other day was that Tia, as an individuated whole, embraces his individuated whole in turn. He must do. He is not devoid. of his inner feminine, he is in touch with his anima in a way which is healthy, in a way which is explorative, and in a way which appreciates that he does not need to look without for love, compassion, receptivity, whatever you want to call it, intuition, the creative seed. All of those things must be within him in order for him to be himself individuated. So even when I'm looking at divine feminine and divine masculine, I'm looking at beings which in turn honour their divine feminine and divine masculine. And that to me is like light bulb, ding ding ding. So that was awesome for me. And I briefly wanted to touch on the sexual thing, with regard to Wicca certainly, and some other kind of avenues of neo-paganism which explore the notion of divine feminine and divine masculine as being the story of birth and of kind of fertility, sexual union, birth, etc. This is something that never really sat with me very well. And it could be, you know, because I think it's too heteronormative in a sense. I'm bisexual and I've had serious relationships with women in the past. And so I suppose from that perspective, I can't really see it making a huge degree of sense to me. Certainly when I first got into the craft and started reading about the craft, it was all about the ladies for me. So maybe in that initial instance, it didn't make too much sense. The other reason that I don't overtly connect to the idea of God and goddess as a married couple is because I myself don't believe in marriage. For me, love other people's weddings, cry like a baby. But for me, I don't believe in marriage, and I don't believe in any union that should be any sense official. I also do not wish to have any children. My reproductive system, as far as I'm aware, is completely in order, but I have no desire to bear children. In a literal physical sense, I feel that everything I write and everything I make and everything I do is a form of birth. And when I look at, you know, the goddess in her pregnancy stage, for example, I think of that. When I look at the Empress in tarot decks where she's heavily pregnant, I don't feel alienated from that because I think of it as metaphor. But in any sense where it becomes too literal and I'm looking at this kind of notion that birth is part of the process and that kind of thing, it alienates me. Of course it alienates me, because it's not something that I ever feel is going to be a part of my life. And that is in a sense why I've also struggled a little with the goddess triad, because obviously the centre of the goddess triad is mother. And I've always found that difficult to connect with on some sense. I mean, I have a very close relationship with my mother, and I think motherhood is a beautiful thing. It's certainly not something that I'm grossed out by or have some psychological aversion to. But it's difficult for me to see myself as mother, and one would argue that at this point in my life, I have reached that mother stage of the triad. And I don't work closely with the idea of the goddess triad for this reason. However, I am very good with metaphor. So I can kind of see the mother aspect of the triad as being the time when creativity comes to bear. And I would say that's definitely true in my life, but I wouldn't necessarily call it the mother aspect. I would be more inclined to call it the artist aspect or something like that, the creatrix. So mother to me is something that it's difficult to get a handle on. But also, as I said, the heteronormative thing, I find that kind of difficult to get to grips with. There might be other reasons why I don't really see God and goddess as necessarily having to pertain to a couple who kind of unify and copulate sexually. Certainly I work closely with Kali and Shiva and have been, you know, more intimately connected with them of late, and they are obviously a couple in that sense, and I enjoy that, but my matron and patron have nothing to do with each other in that way. Hell is married to her work. As any daughters of hell will know, she's very dedicated in that way. She's married to the ice. So yeah, you know, they don't have anything to do with each other. They live in totally separate realms. So, you know, and I wouldn't want to go ahead and try and work with a god and goddess purely on the basis that, you know, there was copulation and that kind of thing. I don't follow the cycle of the 8-spoked wheel of the year to denote overtly anything to do with sex and birth and so on. I do it in a more abstract way. So of course during Beltane I'm thinking about the height of life and abundance and, you know, everything coming into being and manifestation at its hilt. And of course during Samhain and winter solstice I'm thinking about the opposite things. But I don't overtly relate it to that kind of marriage, copulation, birth thing. So that's just me. My consciousness doesn't really assign that a massive amount of importance. But of course there is the notion of the divine couple in Jungian thought. There's a word for it. There is a word for the notion of the divine couple, but I'm not sure what it is. I think it's syzygy. Oh my god, I've got no idea. I'll note it below, probably. The notion of the divine couple for Jung kind of took place when the Anima and the Animus kind of harmonise inside the person, and also the notion that in order to have a fulfilling romantic relationship, you must be connected to both the feminine and masculine within you, so that you don't project your image of what you want a perfect man or woman to be like based on the fact that you need to project because you feel you're in some sense lacking from that in yourself. So the idea of the divine couple occurs when two individuated human beings get together and they both appreciate that their feminine and masculine qualities in accordance with society's portrayal are within, so they're not projecting. Jung saw the projection and the desire to kind of glean something that somebody felt was lacking within them to be extremely destructive. And amongst all of the patients that he saw, he recognised innately that relationships were poisoned and intoxicated by this feeling of lack, which came from people not being able to understand that no matter what body they were born into, all of the core attributes necessary to live a fulfilling life are within. So this was part of what he tried to teach. So, you know, in a sense, I enjoy female and male godhead as a duo in that way, to kind of honour Jung and his teachings, which have been so instrumental to me on my journey. I'm just wondering if there was anything I wanted to say. I'm going to link a couple of videos below, which I feel kind of tune in to the notion that now more than ever, the discussion of feminine and masculine energies as things which are within us all is relevant and important. I feel that men in this day and age are coming to a stage where it's really make or break in terms of this culture that exists, certainly in parts of the Western world, you know, of what it means to be a man and of toughening up and fighting your battles and, you know, the misogyny that is inherent within that too sometimes. And I feel that a lot of boys are at this breaking point where they're personally going through a time where they recognise that they want to get in touch with everything inside of them which society has feminised and therefore othered from them. And I feel that's why the discussion of feminine and masculine is actually more important now than it ever has been, because I feel that gender is too closely related to sexual organs and not closely related enough to psychology. And I feel that men should never be shamed for wanting to harness those things inside them which society has twisted into being something that only females can achieve, and vice versa. And I think it's really coming to an important time in our history now where we're starting to question those things. So below I'm going to list a trailer for a film that's coming up called The Mask You Live In, which is questioning the role of masculinity in society in terms of kind of what we've morphed it into, and how we need to go back to recognising that it's not necessarily un-male or un-masculine to be in touch with those parts which society has feminised, and vice versa. So it's a really powerful trailer. And I'm also going to post below a very short speech from Jane Fonda, which is also about the way boys are raised in society. And I feel that this is another kind of thing that made me prominently click into the fact that Jung was as right now as he's ever been. And any notion that feminine and masculine in the way he used it is supposed to denote division and is supposed to enforce roles on men and women is completely mistaken. It's totally incorrect. Jung's idea was not to create roles for men and women. It was to help people to understand during the process of individuation that there is no role that exists outside of you. You fulfill that role within you. And the more you insist upon not fulfilling that role, the more you'll try and lean on somebody else, and you'll try and project onto somebody else that you hope will fulfill it for you. So it's not about division in any sense. It is about unification of the whole. And I hope I've made that clear. And that's all I wanted to say for now. I think I'll come back to Body of Wisdom by Hilary Hart at another time. But for now, I think that's what I'll say. Okay, blessed be.